Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss. There's another article in the news following on from the local elections, this time from a polling expert pointing out that Labour are, despite what the Tory client journalists are trying to push, on for a substantial majority as things stand. But they also discussed what they think the Conservatives need to do in order to chip away at the lead Labour have, turn things around. And surprisingly to me, they think it involves Sunak's 5 promises. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, yes, we're going to be talking about Sunak's 5 promises from the new year again. It crops up every now and then. And given that this is what the government are going to, at the moment, put their weight behind, then, we are going to have to keep discussing this. But this time in the context of a pollster thinking that the Conservatives need to make headway on them. Now, I'll be honest, I saw the 5 promises as being attempts by two things, really. I think Rishi Sunak trying to unite his party, but also for the government to try and steer the public into prioritising concerns more in line with what the Tories would like to focus on. A bit like the public saying, well, these are our concerns. And the Tories going, tell you what, why don't you have these other concerns instead? I've never seen a poll, for example, which shows that the public really think Sunak's promises drill down to what they're concerned with, or would vote for the Conservatives in significant numbers if he was seen to achieve them. I say seen to achieve them. He has no chance of actually achieving them, not all of them. But that doesn't matter if you can convince voters that you have. But Martin Baxter of electoral calculus fame, who are still forecasting a really large Labour majority at the moment, although I don't see it ending up being that high, was saying that Sunak needs to make progress on his 5 key pledges. Now, I'm assuming there has been some polling on what voters think about the pledges, but I've not seen it. Certainly the government have said that they're not going to be changing direction and that they intend to pursue these 5 promises, deliver on them. I've already made clear that I think this is a questionable strategy, to say the least. This pollster is saying how Sunak has a narrow path to victory and must make progress on these promises. But I would add in here, I think it's sort of partially true. Sunak's 5 promises don't really address the core concerns of voters. That is the issue. And I'll try and explain why in this video. But give you an example. Say, take inflation. Of all his 5 promises, inflation is the one that is most likely to be achieved. It'll have nothing to do with the government, but it's most likely to be achieved. Halving inflation this year compared to last year. Now, of course, inflation is of huge concern to voters because it's tied in with the squeeze on their cost of living. But Sunak's promise is to halve inflation this year compared to last year. And it's like, well, that's not really going to do it for voters. Let's say inflation this year ends up about 5%, okay? Sunak can claim that he's halved it, he's met his promise. But 5% still means that things are 5% more expensive than 5% more expensive in 2023 than they were in 2022. And if people's incomes have only gone up by, say, 2 or 3%, it means that the cost of living is still squeezing harder. People's personal inflation is still higher than their increase in income. Voters don't care about a number in the news. They care about their own lived experience. If their own lived experience is all right, like if they're getting by, even if their standard of living is going down, but they don't notice because you know what, they're still getting by. Yes, they can be fooled by a number in the news and think to themselves, oh, well, maybe the benefits will hit us soon. Oh, it's just in these parts of the country. It'll be our turn next. We'll keep voting Tory. But people are actually struggling. That's not to say I think the promises are irrelevant just because they don't get to the root cause of voters' concerns. But Sunak has made the promises. He has to deliver them, of course, because if he doesn't, of what value are his manifesto promises next year? People, even if voters approve of the manifesto next year, they won't have any confidence he'll deliver them if he fails to deliver on these 5 promises. So from that point of view, of course, he has to deliver them. So Sunak needs to see inflation halved, even if people don't feel the benefit, in order to show he can deliver. The fact that no policy of his will have reduced inflation is neither here nor there, by the way, so I won't bother going over that. But especially on the inflation score, a recent poll indicated that quite a lot of people think that reduced inflation means reduced costs. That if you halve inflation, actually the cost goes down. Oh, It means the cost goes up, just that the increase in the cost isn't quite so steep. So even if voters think halving inflation sounds like a good promise, oh yeah, we'd like to see, and of course we would like to see that. If they think halving inflation means something different in terms of their own lived experience to what it does mean, when at the end of the year he boasts, I said I'd halve inflation, I have to, people are still going to say, but things are more expensive. We thought you meant the prices would come down. The second promise was to grow the economy. This one's dubious. The current forecast is for the economy to shrink this year. It's by such a small margin that, yes, it is entirely possible that we avoid contraction and get a small amount of growth. But we're not going to end up with anything that looks like real growth. You know, if the economy ends up growing by 0.1%, okay, he'll say he's met his promise. But there are two main problems for him, even if this happens. First, his opponents, both inside and outside the Conservative Party, can claim that it's lower growth than in previous years and therefore an economy going in the wrong direction. And second, it suffers the same problem as halving inflation. People aren't going to feel the benefits. When people are struggling, what they need is for their incomes to go up in real terms. That's how they're going to feel the benefits. It's no good just reading about this in the papers. You know, Labour are undoubtedly going to ask voters during the general election campaign, are you better off under the Tories? The answer cannot be yes from anyone without an 8-figure bank balance. Third promise is reducing debt. This isn't happening, is it? I mean, if the banking crisis that's brewing hits before the general election, it's definitely not happening. But even without any more external shocks to the economy, it's hard to see how Sunak gets a win here. It won't be lower than when he took over as Prime Minister because his budgets have baked in quite a lot of borrowing. It'll certainly be way higher than when the Tories took over. And remember, Labour are not interested in judging Sunak as separate to the previous decade of Tory rule. That's what the Tories want to do. They did it with Johnson successfully. They said, yeah, we know Cameron and May were crap, but I'm different. And people believed it. Sunak's now trying the same trick. Yeah, I know Cameron, May and Johnson were all crap and the least said about trust the better, but I'm different. Labour going, no. The Tories have been in power since 2010. We're gonna look at how things were in 2010 compared to now. If Labour left no money in 2010, well, there's a whole lot less now, isn't there? As for the state of the country in 2010, Sunak's fourth pledge is to cut NHS waiting lists. Now you can see the fiddle here. See, do people really care about NHS waiting lists? Surely what people really want is a cut to waiting times. Because think about it. Do people care how many are waiting for treatment? You say to someone, oh, there's 6 million people on the NHS waiting list. Is that a lot? Oh, yeah, that's a lot. Oh, that's terrible. They don't know. No one knows. What you care about is when you need treatment, doctor says, right, you need this treatment, this surgery, whatever it happens to be. How long do I have to wait for it? Am I booked in a few weeks' time, a few months' time? Do I have to wait a couple of years? That's what matters to people, the waiting time. So focusing on waiting lists, which you will naturally do, of course, you will naturally do, but there's an extent to which you could cut the lists by, you could take a load of people off them for random reasons, but you can only reduce waiting times by increasing resources in the NHS. But I'm not really sure any fiddle, and there's bound to be a fiddle, is really going to work well for Sunak in all honesty. Because you can't just cancel treatments for 1 million people without the public noticing. Nor can he just get the NHS to give cancer patients a plaster and a lollipop and tell them their treatment is now complete. So part of reducing the lists, unless I'm missing something, has to include reducing waiting times. And that means more doctors and nurses on the job. In actual fact, what's been happening recently is the news is saying that because people are waiting so much longer, they're becoming even more ill. Of course you do. If you don't get treatment, you don't get any better. You will get worse. So requiring even more resources from the NHS. And the government are actively trying to reduce the number of doctors and nurses and succeeding by cutting their pay severely in real terms as well as making their working conditions worse. This is like his weakest promise, really. It does address something that a concern that the voting public have. It absolutely does. Out of all his 5 promises, I would say this is the one that really does drill down to what voters want. But he has neither the intention nor the capacity to get it back to where it was in 2010. And that is the comparison Labour will be drawing. And he's got little enough capacity and still no real intention of improving it compared to when he took over as Prime Minister. It's going to get worse because the NHS capacity is becoming weaker. The best dodge I could think of would be comparing waiting lists in winter with those in summer, but that only works with a sort of a summer election. And even then, if Labour are successful in pointing out that it's worse in whenever it happens to be in 2024 than it was at the same point in 2023, then Sunak is still only getting limited traction with this promise, if he gets any at all. As for his fifth promise, small boats, his main saving grace with this one is no one really cares. The Office for National Statistics published a poll of what voters were most concerned about on Friday as the local election results are coming out. Small boats was not one of them. In fact, immigration, asylum, nothing like that featured in the main concerns at all. But if voters did care about it, Sunak has already confirmed that he won't have stopped the boats come the general election. Granted, his pledge isn't to stop the boats, it's to introduce legislation that will stop the boats. So he can claim he's introduced the legislation, it's just the boats haven't stopped yet. But again, it's one of those things I think people are going to expect action. They're going to expect, well, why haven't the numbers gone down then? You know, he's probably just hoping that the figures naturally come down, which is possible. But again, Labour can easily compare it with 2010. They can say, no, we're not going to compare it to 2022. We're going to compare it to 2010. So if we summarise all that, there are two promises that he can technically claim to keep if the economic news is good this year, which is only 40% of them. Maybe at a stretch, 3 of them if the number of boat crossings does come down. But how much does it have to come down for the voters to believe it? And even if those promises don't translate into something that will make voters' lives better, because none of them will. It won't improve their standard of living, none of them. The other promises run on a sliding scale from dubious to completely impossible. And it's possible that none of them will be met. You would think inflation should go down, but what happens if banking crisis hits this year? And you would think that at the moment the forecast is for the economy to shrink. It could grow. What if it doesn't? So if the Conservatives really are going to be relying on keeping these 5 promises, and the government are doing nothing practically to actually hit them, then they're essentially leaving it to luck. You know, and especially when you put it on the background of the worse than expected local election results last week, I would certainly be more than a little concerned. If I were a Tory MP who had any sort of brain, thinking to myself, well, we're sort of left here hoping the 5 promises are kept because we're not actually doing anything to force the issue. We've had worse than expected local election results. If I wanted to remain a Tory MP going into 2025, I'd be a bit worried. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.